Today I'm going to be restoring this oxidized headlight, and the most important thing to understand first is what has actually occurred to this headlight. On most of them from the factory, there's some sort of protective coating on top of the headlights to prevent it from oxidizing like this one has. And over the years, if these don't get waxed or cleaned regularly, that coating is going to get eaten alive by the sun, completely removed, and then the bare plastic underneath that coating is going to get ruined. So the only way to actually restore the headlight and to make it look perfect again is to remove all of the dead oxidized plastic with sandpaper and then polish it back out, or you could clear coat it. However, in every experience with clear coat I've ever seen, usually fails prematurely. You get overspray all over the place, and it's just not as professional of a job in my opinion, and it makes it very difficult to do it a second time if you ever need to. So in order to get this headlight looking good again, we can't just put on a magic bug spray product that's going to make it look any better. We have to physically remove all of the dead plastic that's on there and then polish out the sanding scratches. It is very important that you use the least abrasive sandpaper possible in order to save yourself from having to do an unnecessary amount of work. So this headlight is extremely oxidized, and there are places where I can see the coating is still kind of holding on by a thread. That coating is extremely hard, much harder than the plastic, and it's difficult to remove. So I'm going to be using 800 grit sandpaper for the very first sand in order to get all of that off, and then we'll go up from there until we can polish it out at about 2000 grit sandpaper. The most important thing before you start sanding is to tape off all of the areas around the headlight, and because the hood is coming in contact with here for a while, I just open the hood so then I have no chance of accidentally sanding the clear coat on the car. Whenever you're applying the tape to the headlight, the best results you're going to be able to get is get in the crack in between the headlight and the actual paint itself in order to make sure that 100% of the clear coat surfaces are covered. So especially around here and on this edge, you just have to really spend your time here, because if you accidentally sand your clear coat with 800 grit, you're going to have a long road ahead of you trying to get that out. Make sure that you always use some sort of a sanding block or a pad whenever you're sanding. If you just use your fingers and push on it, you're going to leave very deep scratches in the material in the shape of your fingers on there, because you're not dispersing the pressure evenly. So this sanding block is going to allow me to have a very flat surface that smoothly sands down everything on here. So it's really important, especially with the lower grit sandpaper such as 800, is that you let the sandpaper do all of the work for you. When I'm making contact with this, I am simply just gliding the sandpaper over the surface with enough pressure to make good contact and to make full contact, but not enough to where I'm actually digging it into the surface and potentially leaving very deep scratches that may be deeper than the 800 grit that this is rated for, meaning that if you sand incorrectly with 800 grit, you could leave a 120 grit scratch, and that is not going to come out during the polishing process. So you need to make sure to be very flat, make sure the applicator is always even in terms of pressure with your fingers the whole way around it. And with the water, you need to have plenty of it on there, especially when you're getting started, because what this water is doing is it's taking all this yellow dead plastic and it's running it away on the paint. This is going to get all over your bumper, and I do recommend doing this before you wash your car if you are going to wash the car, because obviously you're going to make a little bit of a mess doing it. Let's get started. So as you can see already, that is a very, very yellow material that is coming off of there. That is the dead plastic that we're removing. So what I'm paying attention to right now is the pressure that I'm dispersing with my fingers on this pad in order to make sure that I do have even coverage of the area. And another thing I'm doing is listening. I am listening for any inconsistencies that are happening as I'm sanding. I want to hear the same amount of friction on all areas. If you were to get a little piece of grit stuck in between the sandpaper and the headlight, that would scratch the crap out of the headlight. You'll be able to hear that. So it's important that you stay in tune with that type of stuff. So I'm just working about half of the headlight right now in an up and down motion, and the reason that I have not switched to side is because when I go up with the finer grit sandpaper, I'm actually going to sand in the opposite direction, meaning side to side, and I'm going to make sure that I got all of the previous sanding scratches out after after I'm done sanding and can inspect it with a light. So all the ones going up are 800, all the ones going the opposite direction would be 1500, 1000, whatever you do next. And that's a good way to be able to tell if you actually successfully remove those sanding scratches or not. Another thing you can tell is that this liquid coming off of the headlight is starting to get a lot clearer, and that means that most of that dead plastic is gone, and now we just have the raw, clean plastic underneath it. So I've gotten until I'm getting just clear plastic off of here. Quick tip, if you have compressed air, it'll dry that out very quickly. And what I see is that all of this looks perfect, but down here that coating is still left behind. And that is a very thick coating. So I'm gonna take the sandpaper and I'm gonna move it to a brand new side that I have not used at all yet, and I'm just gonna work that area until that coating is gone. The first grit of sandpaper that you use is the most important because you're doing all of the work trying to remove the defects with that grit. So you have to be the most thorough, and if you don't remove the defect with that grit of sandpaper, you're not going to do it with the lighter sandpaper. So you really need to take your time and make sure that everything is good. And the most confusing part for me about using the follow-up grits to remove the sanding scratches of the more rough one is knowing when to stop, because there's not really a clear indication. And kind of what I've learned is you mostly go by feel. You'll feel as you start sanding, the surface will be rough, and then it'll almost kind of smooth out after the first grit has been removed by the finer grit. And especially on an area like this curve, you really have to make sure you're focusing on keeping it flat. It's obviously not possible to keep it flat around that curve. You just have to let the sanding block kind of flow within your hands, keeping constant pressure on it, but not too much to dig into the surface. Let the sandpaper do all of the work and just allow it to stay as flat as you can possibly get. And this is a very easy headlight to sand because of how flat the majority of it is. However, it does have some curves in it, so you really do have to make sure to be careful or you will not remove all the sanding scratches during the polishing process. So I can feel that this headlight is a lot smoother and a little bit clearer now that I've gone over it with the 1000 grit. And I'm gonna dry it up as much as I can. I'm gonna take my light to it and I'm gonna make sure that all the scratches that I'm looking at are going in this direction from the second step of polishing or second step of sanding, and not still going straight up from the first stage with an 800 grit. As you can see, all of these scratches are going left to right. There's a few stray up and down scratches. However, I'm not worried about them because most of the ones I've found are from other things, such as scratches that are just from normal everyday use that are way deeper and I need much more abrasive sandpaper to remove. So I'm happy with that. I'm gonna go with 1500 in an up and down motion. And when I'm done with that, we should only see up and down scratches. So what's important to understand before you start polishing is that with the sanding, we used abrasives. The friction of the abrasives is what actually scuffed away all the dead plastic on here. Now with a polisher, it's a lot finer, a lot less abrasive. However, it creates a lot of heat, and that heat is what's actually able to kind of almost melt the plastic, put it into the pad, remove all of the sanding scratches, and leave you behind with a perfectly polished surface. So whenever you select a pad for your headlight, you have to make sure that the pad is small enough to where you can actually put a lot of force down on the headlight to generate the heat necessary to remove these sanding scratches. Pretty much in all scenarios, unless you're using a rotary, if you're proficient with using a rotary, I would recommend you use one in pretty much all scratch removal scenarios because of how much more efficient they are because of all the extra heat that they generate. But in most scenarios with a dual action polisher, you are not going to remove 100% of the sanding scratches on the first pass. So it is normal to have to do 2 or 3 passes to remove all of the sanding scratches on there, even if you're using a microfiber cutting pad with a Meguiar's correcting cream like I am, which is very abrasive. Also, another thing is I'm only going to work a small section of the headlight at a time until it's perfect and then move on over. If I just try to do the whole entire headlight in one pass with a pad, I would not actually remove anything close to all of the scratches because understand you're removing plastic and clogging it in the pad as you're polishing. So you have to make sure you're not doing too large of an area or your pad can't retain it, and you're just literally wasting your time doing more polishing because the pad is clogged. It can't actually take in any more compound, if that makes sense. So I'm using a Harbor Freight dual action polisher with a Meguiar's 3-inch backing plate, Meguiar's 3-inch microfiber cutting pad on it, and Meguiar's correction cream. I've already seasoned and prepped the pad, meaning I sprayed some ONR on it, wiped it all in, and I've done the whole other section with it. So I'm going to put a decent bit of compound on here, more than I would originally use, like just if it was on paint, just removing swirls. The reason for the extra compound is because you really want to help kind of get all the abrasives that you can in order to remove these sanding scratches and help you be able to polish for just a little bit longer. Because like I said, we're removing plastic from the headlight. When you use a lot of compound, that compound will leave itself all over the headlight, and in that compound, after you've polished, it has that plastic in it. So you can kind of get away with polishing for a longer amount of time using more compound, because it'll kind of spread out that plastic in other places besides the pad. That is pretty much exactly the results I'm looking for. I'm gonna keep on polishing it out. In order to be efficient removing these sanding scratches, you have to be on a high speed machine setting. I'm on speed 4 out of 6. You need to make sure you're pressing down pretty well, but you can never stop. If you kind of get stuck in an area for a second and that heat builds up too much, you will literally burn the plastic on the headlight, and you have to start the sanding process all over again to remove that. So make sure you keep it moving, especially if you're using a rotary, and that's exactly what you're looking for. What I've always noticed with any type of oxidation removal, whether it's on paint or on plastic, is that once that oxidation happens, it happens a lot easier in the future. And it's almost like, imagine when they make this plastic, they add in some sort of chemical that gives it UV protection, and they put a coating on the top of it. So let's say that that coating is gone and it's just the bare plastic. Well, the UV protection that's actually inside of this plastic is most likely dried out, and there's literally nothing protecting it at all anymore from the sun. So what's important now is that you wax it, you ceramic coat it, you put a sealant on it or whatever. Doesn't matter what you use, it matters that you're consistent with it. As soon as that product starts wearing off, put another application of it on there. If you're just worried about your headlights, it'll literally take you about 2 minutes to just do your headlights. Even if you don't have to wash the whole car, just wipe them down, put some wax on there. Or if you ceramic coat them, that's the best thing. You're not really gonna have to deal with it. I'm gonna ceramic coat these, but that's for another video. And as long as you're consistent with your maintenance schedule, you'll never have that problem again. So if you have any other questions, let me know, but thank you for watching.